Can't get rid of it.
Hi, everybody. Good evening, and welcome to the Washington County Museum of Fine Arts. My name is Jillian McMaster, Manager of Publications and Media, and I'm happy to welcome you to the second of two curators' talks on the exhibition Bernini and the Roman Baroque, Masterpieces from Palazzo Chigi in Ariccia. The exhibition is on view through September 19th, so please be sure to stop by at the museum if you hadn't had a chance to experience this landmark exhibition yet. Please welcome the museum's director, Sarah Hall, and Agneta M. Stein, Schreiber curator, Daniel Folco.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us and welcome to the museum online. I'm Sarah Hall, director of the Washington County Museum of Fine Arts. I can say that you will enjoy this tonight, even if you haven't seen part one. But don't despair, because you can find part one on our website or our YouTube channel. I just have a couple of announcements before Daniel gets started. We're busy creating a wide variety of interpretive experiences for all ages and interests. And so I want to make sure you know about some of our other upcoming programs. After tonight's program, we have another one of our Art Bites series, in which we have partnered with the Blue Ridge Community and Technical College on a series of programs that combine art history and cooking, and a little bit of food history in there as well. And so this Saturday at 1 o'clock, we have Chef Kathy Lee Ferguson doing a roasted cauliflower, both a vegetarian and a non-vegetarian version, with our Jean Cushwa intern, Faith Harrington, talking about the painting Summer by Mario De Fiori and Carla Maratta that's in the exhibition. And I'm not sure whether you'll see an image of it tonight or not. But you will definitely learn more about that Saturday if you log on. We stream those live on Facebook, but you can also get a link in advance if you email us, and then you get the recipes ahead of time, which is somewhat helpful. We also have a Let's Talk Art coming up next week that's related to our Joshua Johnson exhibition, which is, I think, going to be a really fun one because we have some special guests. We have Elizabeth Howe, the librarian and certified archivist from the Western Maryland Reading Room at the Washington County Free Library. We have Carol Miller Schultz from the Washington County Geological Society, and we have Brett Peters, curator at the Washington County Historical Society, joining me and Daniel to talk about genealogical research as it dovetails with art history and subjects of portraiture, focusing specifically on some of the subjects that are in our Joshua Johnson exhibition. We also have a pop-up workshop on August 27th from 11 to 1 for all ages, exploring heraldry and family crests. If you've seen the Bernini exhibition, you know that the Kiji family crest is a design motif throughout the show. And so Kelly Mealy, our Director of Education, will be out in the Rose Garden from 11 to 1 that day. And I can't tell you how much pleasure I have gotten out of walking out on those Friday afternoons and seeing people spread out on the grass, working on casual art projects together, families, all ages of people working together on their blankets. We actually have little blankets you can put out and sit on. So it's a delightful thing. Right now, I'm so proud of our truly impressive exhibition program with Bernini and the Roman Baroque on simultaneously with Joshua Johnson, portraitist of early American Baltimore. I think the two exhibitions really showcase the breadth of what we can do at the museum, which leads me to putting in my usual plug for museum membership. I'll be a little personal here and say that, you know, we are a free museum. We've been free for 90 years. And for often the incentive to join a museum is free admission. We don't have that incentive for you. You get discounts, you get special, special programs, you get advance notice of things, you get more communication from us, but primarily your membership supports what we do. And, you know, we're friendly people. I really feel like we have a connection with our members. So I would just say, you know, please join us if you haven't and you like what we do. I would also like to mention that you can sign up for our emails at the top right corner of our website so that you get Daniel's wonderful weekend art series. You get links to his Curator's Den program and find out, you know, about other things that we're doing that way. And now I'm not going to say much about Daniel. I'm not going to make it a formal introduction, except that Dr. Daniel Fulco, PhD, our Agneta M. Steinschreiber Curator, has been my colleague for a year now. He's been an absolute pleasure to have as a coworker, colleague, and friend, although it's been hard during COVID when we see each other. It's like, hey, hi, because so often we're working remotely still. But I've appreciated his flexibility, his willingness to always jump online for these programs. And you guys don't know the half of it because he's doing a lot of staff trainings and he's participated in scholarly panel discussions. He's always doing other research. He's always working on the next exhibition, you know, organizing gallery installations, researching potential acquisitions. It's a busy job with great variety. So I think he definitely enjoys it. But I will tell you that the thing I like the best is that so many people in the community know Daniel and that he's really accessible to our audience and visitors. So with that, I'm going to let him take over and I will log out of here and enjoy his talk along with the rest of you. Thanks, everybody. Enjoy.
Thank you very much, Sarah, for that lovely introduction. Certainly, since you began just over a year ago, it's been great working together. And as we look forward to the fall and beyond that, there's a lot of interesting work to be done here at the museum. And in addition with the Bernini exhibition, our upcoming exhibitions that I'm going to look forward as well to talking to you about. So thanks very much for that. And tonight, it gives me great pleasure to be able to come back and continue where I left off last time, for those of you who were able to come, and continuing to look at John Lorenzo Bernini's phenomenal artistic output, and also seeing how the exhibition that we have, Bernini in the Roman Baroque, connects to the life and work of this great artist. So let me just share my screen with you and we will get started. Just change this bar here. One moment. And if you haven't had a chance to come to see this exhibition, I really encourage you to do so. If it's within your driving distance, it's really an outstanding show. And tonight I'd like to explore how some of the works on the show intersect with Bernini's artistic output. The show is on through September 19th, and it is really quite fabulous. Such a special opportunity for these works that are from the Palazzo Chigi that you see here in this photo on the lower left. They are here on view in Hagerstown, a special opportunity to see such a fabulous princely collection, some of which was developed originally by Cardinal Fabio Kiji of the Chigi family. So with that, I'm going to launch into the presentation for tonight. And just to orient you to where we are in 17th century Italy, and specifically in Rome. So down here, and we're looking also, we're talking about tonight some other places that are within the environs of Rome, but here in the region of Lazio. And in addition to that, we're going to go up to Versailles briefly later on in the presentation as we survey and we look at John Lorenzo Bernini's artistic creativity, and in that context, both artistic and architectural. Bernini lived from 1598 to 1680, and I won't go into a lot of detail tonight about his biographical background, but tonight what I'd like to do is introduce his work, because we're going to be looking at sort of the second half of his career tonight. We're going to be going back to the 1640s and then making our way up to just around the time of his death. The last works that he does are in the 1670s. This is a fabulous drawing, a self-portrait that he did at chalk on paper, and you can see how he was sort of fashioning himself in his later years. He's much more stern looking. He's seasoned in terms of all of the experience that he has. Here he is, represented by his student. We're going to be talking about him as well tonight, Giovanni Battista Gauli, otherwise known as Il Baciccio, his nickname. He did a portrait of his master Baciccio in about 1675. And this shows Bernini towards right around the time that he's winding down his career. And here he is represented not long after his death. We think this was done about 1680, and it is an etching that was created by the Flemish artist Arnold van Westerhout. And it was done after Baciccio's portrait that you see on the left here. So a lot of these artists are in many ways connected to one another. And that's another really interesting thing about this exhibition. If you have the time to go through and read many of the labels, and also read the catalog, you'll see that the artistic relationships between and among these artists and architects in 17th century Rome were so tight. It doesn't always mean that they got along with each other. For example, Bernini certainly was a rival of a number of his contemporaries, particularly Pietro da Cortona, whom we talked about last time, and also Francesco Borromini, who's a renowned architect. But they worked together within these streets and districts of Rome. And tonight we're going to be looking at St. Peter's. We'll return there briefly and see the projects on which Bernini worked. We'll also be seeing some monuments off of Via del Corso, which is one of the main avenues today in Rome. It's the main shopping street. And we're going to also see some buildings that are today what's up on the Capitoline Hill and scattered across other hills and areas of Rome, including Il Gesù Cathedral, which we'll look at towards the end in relation to that student of Bernini named Baciccio. So we'll be coming back to Rome. So to begin tonight, I just wanted to show the direction in which Bernini goes by the time he gets to the mid-1600s. He receives a commission in the 1640s that I like to begin with because it really embodies Bernini's aesthetic. It's a lesser known piece, and it's a memorial to a woman named Maria Raggi. And this was actually commissioned for a family member, that is Maria Raggi, by members of her family. And they included her relatives Ottaviano, Tommaso, and Lorenzo. And they wanted to remember her. She was a nun from the island of Chios, which is today very close to Greece in the Mediterranean. She became a nun in 1571, departed for Rome in 1584, and she became a resident at the Palazzo of the De Marini family, near the Church of Santa Maria sopra Minerva that you're looking at here in this photograph. It was originally a medieval church, but it has subsequent alterations. And Bernini is commissioned by this family to do this epitaph for her. It has this elaborate inscription on it. But look at how he carves this. It's in multicolored marble. He's got the black and the gold contrasted with one another with this effigy of her, this relief. And you can see how she's clutching her cloak and she's closed her eyes. She's in a state of ecstasy. There's a cross positioned just at the top of the central medallion. And look at how the cherubs carry it upwards. It's very theatrical. It's as if the marble were coming to life, as if wind were blowing it, even though it's attached here to this column. This is part of Bernini's aesthetic. He wants to make the art to a certain degree come alive and almost be this kind of theatrical spectacle that we see before our very eyes. I want you to keep this in mind because this sort of sets the basis for several really key commissions that we're going to look at tonight. And in particular, one of these is in the Church of Santa Maria in the Vialata. And this, I brought this in because we have a drawing that is in the exhibition that you see in the center. This is the Church of Santa Maria in Vialata, which is not far from the Corso in Rome. It's very narrow because the Corso is actually a large, it's a long street, but it's quite narrow. So to get a look at the facade, you have to be sort of across the way. And it was designed originally by Bernini's rival Pietro da Cortona, who's a renowned painter, but also an architect. And that's what I wanted to point out about the collaborations. Even though Cortona and Bernini don't necessarily get along, they still have to work side by side in many cases. But for Bernini, he wasn't developing the exterior design for it, he's working on the interior. And the drawing that we have in the exhibition is Bernini's in his workshop's initial concept for the apse in the church. Look at how he conceives it. It's almost a complete spectacle. See how you have these exedri, which are these curving elements of the wall, set into the design of the apse. And then you have this sort of half dome that forms part of this. So Bernini is working out the ideas for not only sculpture and architecture, but also fresco painting and also the stucco work that you see in the altar down below. Also, what's going to be the central decoration, you can see the dove here representing the Holy Spirit in the center. He did this in the mid-1630s, but the project itself is not executed in its entirety until the 1640s, almost all the way to 1662. This is how it came out. And it's really neat to see how this is working. So this was actually done by several pupils of Bernini, including a man named Giuliano Finelli. You also have the sculptor Andrea Bolgi, and then the painter Andrea Camasei, who would complete the fresco much later. So this is how it would turn out at the end. You have these two pillars that are supporting this almost canopy type portion of the apse that you see at the top. And then also the decorations are added, multicolored, that is the polychrome marbles. So Bernini is conceiving this one section of the church as part of his design addition or element to the entire overall ensemble. He's going to take this kind of aesthetic and apply it to a very important commission that he receives from the Cornaro family, specifically the Venetian Cardinal Francesco in 1645. And this leads to one of his most famous sculptures, besides those that he created in his earlier career. Here you've got the Church of Santa Maria della Vittoria shown on the left, which was put up according to designs by Carlo Maderno and completed by Giovanni Battista Soria back in 1620. But Bernini is called in to design a side chapel, which in the photograph that you see here is on the left. So he doesn't develop all of this that you see, all of the decoration. He's working only on one part. And the focus, the centerpiece of this phenomenal decorative and sculptural ensemble is the Ecstasy of St Teresa, which is among his most famous and also really one of my favorite sculptures by him. It operates on so many different planes of the artist's aesthetic that it is just remarkable. Very simple exterior of the church that you see here, but when you go inside, look at the elaborate Baroque decoration. That's what the part of the Baroque is about. It's about an element of surprise. It makes us wonder what exactly it is that, how exactly do we see faith and the Christian teachings, that is the Catholic teachings, how do we conceive them and how are they portrayed and presented to the public? Bernini is very much preoccupied with these issues. So moving off to the left there, you can see the Ecstasy of St. Teresa in its context off the central apse. So it's just one part of this church, but it's actually eclipsed in many ways the other artists who contributed to this enormous project. The Ecstasy of St. Teresa is a tour de force in the history of art because of how it works together. You have sculptural relief, you have a three-dimensional piece here, you have the rays of sun that reach down from this little niche that's shown up above here. The entire piece is just so amazing. Look at how the members of the Cornaro family peer out from these little loggias or boxes. It's as if they were at the opera or within a theater and they're looking out and witnessing this event that we see here. Work like this in many ways epitomizes the Baroque concepts of a concetto or concept and something called bel composto. And the bel composto is how all the parts fit together. That's what Bernini is very preoccupied with, is how does sculpture, painting, decoration, church ceremony, light, and architecture work together to create an entire work of art. In German, sometimes we call this Gesamtkunstwerk, would be a 19th century and modern way of discussing it. Well, Bernini is very adept at doing this, and that's what he wants to do. To create a situation in which if you're having a ceremony with this chapel, that spectators are invited to participate. They are felt to be like they are part of these figures that seem to come to life as if they would step out from the loggias into our space. And then, of course, it focuses on the centerpiece here, where we see the St. Teresa, who writhes in spiritual ecstasy from the transverberations or the repeated thrusts of the arrow puncturing her breast, and also by the light that comes down from that window that I mentioned before. It's really a dramatic piece. And you have to see it at a certain time of the day. Depending on the light and the time of the year, the light comes in above from that, what's almost like a skylight, and it comes down below into the viewer's space. It's very, very theatrical. The sculpture almost looks like it would come to life. And she seems to almost start levitating, beginning to levitate above this rock. The angel and the arrow that we see here were instruments of God's love. And according to Teresa's biography, her intense feelings of pain and joy derived from her passion for God, such that she experienced it while she was taking the Eucharist. And what Bernini does is he transforms Teresa's interior feelings into visceral form. She begins to embody the power of God's love through the sacrifice of his son, a salient theme in the funerary chapel that embodied its patrons, in this case, Cornaro, that we were talking about before, his hope for salvation. And that we may find piety, we may find salvation in the story of Teresa, and therefore it connects to the contemporary worshiper. Bernini coordinating all the parts of this sculpture as a part of it, creating a convincing and also an endless vision of a miracle. And that's what the Catholic Counter-Reformation is about in many regards, is it's about making these miracles come to life. We're going to see how that works in his pupil's work by Ciccio later on in the presentation. But this is really amazing. You see it, if you look up above, it's tough to get a sense of it. There's also painting. Look at the dove representing the Holy Spirit that's above the actual altar itself. The whole ensemble is meant to work together. The gilded stucco rays behind Teresa, what they do is they concretize the light of God, while natural light let in through the window that we see behind the altar links the figures and the heavenly light to the earthly world, and therefore to the people who are coming into the church below. It's just a stunning piece. You see the interaction of the members of the Cornaro family together in this relief. Look at his attention to detail on the textures of the marble. This is very hard to work. He creates almost the trompe-l'oeil or fool the eye background here, as if they're standing in front of a door with all of these cracks in it. And St. Teresa, I should point out, she was a Carmelite reformer and an administrator in Spain. She was also a mystical writer. She was a female doctor of the church and one of Christ's more quote unquote famous mystical brides. Very important in Catholic worship in the 17th century. In terms of connecting it to the Eucharist, the idea is that we have communion as a prelude to ecstasy, and that the most mystical marriage visions occurred after Catholic women received communion, thus relating to contemporary worshipers, not only men, but also women coming into this church. And here's what she looked like, or at least we believe she looked like in her lifetime. On the left, a painting by Peter Paul Rubens, really outstanding one. And on the right, Francisco de Zurbaran's depiction of her. The textures of this sculpture are just unbelievable. And I should point out, in addition to the spiritual aspects of it, it also was an opportunity for Bernini to explore eroticism in art. By using this religious subject and context, she also is almost having not only a miraculous vision, but as some scholars, and I would also argue too, would say it is almost orgasmic in the way that she is feeling this moment. It's painful, but at the same time, it's also soothing, it's caressing. And he establishes this duality if we look at the details of the work. It's almost as if her cloak is about to come off in many regards. Look at how the draperies billow out into the space of the viewer. And also, again, like we saw with the epitaph for Raji earlier, this is a work that appears to almost be blowing in the wind. She's almost levitating. And look at the expression on her face as well. Just an incredible attention to detail and grace. As you can see also, he very delicately captures the way her mouth opens at this time. And here's just a quotation from the French philosopher, also Catholic, named Pascal. We come to know truth not only by reason, but still more through our hearts. The fact that the heart here, the passion for one's faith, is part of the way that we can connect to this higher spiritual ideal. And I think it connects very well here with Bernini's work. One of the members of the Carnaro family looks like he's about to jump out of his loge. Now, Bernini also would explore this kind of both erotic but also miraculous type of sculpture in what is often considered his last piece, shown on the left. And I'm jumping ahead a little bit here because it connects so closely to the Ecstasy of St Teresa. And this is the sculpture of the Blessed Ludovica Albertoni, who was a Roman noblewoman who entered the Third Order of St. Francis. The church we're looking at on the right, designed by Onorio Longhi and Mattia de Rossi, is San Francesco Ariccia. It's dedicated to St. Francis. Begun in 1603, but continuing with different alterations through 1701. Bernini, in the interim, is called in to do this remarkable sculpture. Look at how she grasps her breast here. The eroticism cannot be ignored. And by this time, the sculptor, even though he's very old, he still really can do his draperies. And you can see how he was reaching back at and looking for inspiration from the Ecstasy of St. Teresa almost 30 years earlier in his career. It's just a tour de force, this work. Just stunning how he was able to drill out both her fingers, the anatomical detail. Look at how her head rests against the pillow. The cushion curves and bends with her weight. We get the sense that this is fully three-dimensional. This is a person, almost as if she is coming to life in this context in front of the altar. Now, Bernini didn't just do interior church commissions and designs. He also created public monuments, works that are out in the open in Rome. And one of them is very famous. Those of you who are familiar with Rome and may know this is a very famous Piazza Navona, which Bernini designed around this time. And the work that we're going to be looking at is here out in front of the Palazzo Pamphili, the Fountain of the Four Rivers. There's also this great Egyptian obelisk that's on the other end. This is part of a commission from the very famous Pope Innocent X, who was a member of the Pamphili family. And one of the things to realize about the popes is, sure, they're after political glory, personal gain, but they also are very much dedicated in their roles as bishops of Rome, as caretakers of the city. They also want to provide good public works and services to the people of Rome. And that's what Innocent was trying to do here. He was trying to restore the water supply to the Roman people in the mid-17th century. This involved the restoration of aqueducts, but also creating places where Romans who did not have running water could come to get fresh water supply. And this was actively used for that purpose in the mid-1600s in Rome. And you have this enormous obelisk that's placed in the middle of this fountain, Four Rivers Fountain, which depicts the four parts of the earth that are allegorized by the figures of the rivers in those particular continents. In Africa, the Nile. In India, the Ganges. The Americas, specifically South America, Rio de la Plata. And Europe, the Danube River. Again, what's emphasized here is looking back at antiquity, the creating of a grotto that comes to life within the context of people actually going about a daily task, in this case of getting water. And here you can see several of those figures. I believe that what we're looking at here is the Rio de la Plata over here on the right, and then it goes around to the Nile, and then on the other side, I believe you'd have the Ganges and the Danube. And you can see the rock as if it were a cavern. The water, the color always in these fountains in Rome is this really wonderful blue, wonderful reflection. In fact, the water itself, if you get it coming out of the spout there, many Romans will tell you that it is safe to drink the water, or at least use it to wash up, because the supply comes from mountain springs outside the city, not very far actually from the town of Ariccia and other places northwest of Rome. But again, the sculptures are activated. They almost become participants in this activity. They appear to jump out of their places. These are actually personifications of the river gods. Each of them with the figures. We have the coats of arms, and I believe this one is the coat of arms of Innocent X that's shown up here. So it reminds people of who put up this fabulous monument. It's all because of papal patronage. And then the water, of course, alluding to the fact that these are river gods, comes below in the fountain basin. So all works together, again, as a kind of total work of art. The space animated, activated for the viewer. And this really shows you a nice context for the entire project. This is also part of the renewal of the city, the laying out of new streets. And this continues for Bernini in his design, as we discussed last time, for St. Peter's Basilica, and also Piazza di San Pietro in Rome, where the Pope to this day still addresses crowds outside here. The colonnade created by Bernini between the 1650s and early 1660s that almost seems to reach out and welcome visitors into this enormous complex. Now, what I'm going to focus on this time is I'm going to take you inside so you can see something that Bernini did that's just striking. Again, it's just absolute architectural and sculptural theater. If you were to enter in this side here, you're going to come into something called the Scala Regia. And the Scala Regia is very important because what it does is it leads eventually into the Sistine Chapel, one of the most important and sacred spaces within the entire Vatican, next to the seat of St. Peter and his tomb, which is below the main altar in the actual basilica itself. And this here shows the Piazza San Pietro. This entire project was intended to be 7 to 8 times larger than the Campidoglio, created by Michelangelo, which is up on the Capitoline Hill. So what the popes were trying to do is here, they're trying to do a little bit of competition with their predecessors. And this is certainly a political motivation and ambition at the time. So the complex here, in terms of the geometrical layout, Bernini's large colonnade, it relates to previous projects, specifically the geometry of the Campidoglio on the other side of town. Now, before we get there, I just wanted to point out several other works in the exhibition that connect to antiquity. And in particular, we have a group of foreign artists who are working in Rome at the time. They include people like Jean Lemaire, who was fascinated by Roman architecture and ruins. It's at this time, continuing in the activities that occurred during the Renaissance, that artists begin to do more excavations in Rome. You have the development of antiquarian societies of learned people, scholars. Also, many of these people are members of the church, they're politicians, and they take a tremendous interest in the ancient past of Rome. And that's what we see here with landscape with Roman Mausoleum. We see before the use of the Egyptian obelisks, the repurposing of some ancient portions of marble from other monuments that are spoliated or taken off of buildings in the city and being reused or repurposed. In this case, you have this large Egyptian obelisk in the piazza itself. Artists like Jean Lemaire, who in this case is French, he takes a tremendous interest in this kind of art classical archaeology. And he incorporates it into this work in which we have 2 fictional figures, one of whom looks like an elder philosopher, perhaps a statesman, who's instructing this younger man in the ideals of classical architecture and perhaps the principles of antiquity, ethical, moral, philosophical, where it's left up to the viewer to decide exactly what's going on. But it's set within an idealized landscape, and the artist pays particular attention to classical and archaeological detail and accuracy. And an artist like Lemaire would have known about works created by people very famously like Nicolas Poussin, with his landscape with ashes of Phocion that's derived from classical sources, in which the architecture and the landscape almost subjugate, they dominate the narrative at hand. Another artist who took a great interest in ancient ruins is Cornelius von Pullenburg. And Cornelius von Pullenburg is also represented in the show. Though his is a bit different, sometimes he worked on pieces like this one on the right, the prophet Elijah and the widow of Zarephath, which is derived from the Old Testament. But again, the narrative is in some ways superfluous to his interest in classical archaeology and in antiquarian studies. And we see that with the work that's on view in the show. On the left here by Pullenburg, who was a member of a group of Flemish and Dutch artists active in Rome at the time, named the Bentvogels, who were the birds of a feather. That's their nickname in Flemish. So this is an important group of artists. But here how he doesn't really glorify the grandeur of the monuments so much as look at their past glory. And then he inserts a very humorous and odd detail of a man who's urinating on a wall over on the left-hand side by bringing in an aspect of daily life or genre and combining it with the grandeur of the classical past. There's a sculpture of a deity up above that is sort of, in a certain way, witnessing the events going on below. This is combined with the interest in the pastoral, in the inclusion of these goats that are shown here, and there's a shepherd also over here in the middle ground. So this is just showing you how we don't just have Italian artists working in Rome at the time, but we also have many foreign artists. It's also my objective to demonstrate the breadth and depth of the Chigi collections and their representation in the exhibition. So as I was explaining before, this photograph here just shows you what the Campidoglio looks like. This was designed by Michelangelo, and the Piazza San Pietro done by Bernini is trying to rival that monument. Now, when you go inside that right-hand entranceway to the facade, Bernini is charged with the task, specifically by Alexander VII. He is named Fabio Kiji, and he's an important figure in Bernini's career. Bernini is charged with renovating the Scala Regia, or regal staircase that leads up to St. Peter's. And here we have the vision of Constantine that he creates in 1670. Again, it is so theatrical. To give you some context, here are the papal guards here, the Swiss guards. There's a nice photo showing it. The Alexander VII's coat of arms, these personifications of fame blow their trumpets and announce to the viewers, to visitors who would have been received here by the Pope, that he made this, he renovated. And here's the vision of Constantine shown on the right-hand side, a staircase that is meant to appear very vast and very long, but actually it's a perspectival illusion. The narrow barrel vault that's coffered that we see here actually creates a visual trick that makes us think that the staircase is longer than it actually is. Not to say that it's not impressive or very grand. So visitors would come in through this entranceway. They would see this dramatic sculpture that shows Emperor Constantine on horseback, gazing up literally at divine light shining down below. Look at this curtain in back of him, this drape. It's almost blowing in the winds. It's as if we're seeing this taking place on top of a stage. It's just a remarkable work. And it depicts the emperor at the moment in which he received divine inspiration, specifically the vision of the cross, with the words in Latin, hoc signo vinces, in this sign you shall conquer. And specifically before the Battle of the Milvian Bridge, this is, according to the historical sources, a battle that took place north of Rome along the Tiber. This is when Constantine sees this vision. It's this event just before that specific battle. And it is at this time that he believes in the Christian faith, that the protection of Christ and God is going to allow him to triumph in this battle. And that's the episode that's depicted here, those moments beforehand. And what the Pope was trying to do with this was create a dramatic impression on visitors who would come and establish a link between himself, the glory of Constantine, and the power of the Christian faith that basically it empowers the Pope on earth to act as a representative of God. And in receiving diplomatic delegations, that would send a message to them that they are looking at the authority of God and Christianity in his presence. So it's just really amazing. It's architecture and it's sculpture all coming together. And look at how, if you go in at different times during the day, how the light plays off of this. Stunning. Now, during the 1660s, Bernini is engaged on a number of different projects. He is actually working on redesigning Ariccia for the Chigi family, and I explained this when Sarah and I were doing Let's Talk Art a couple of weeks ago, and I won't go into a lot of detail about that. But Bernini is, when he comes back to, just before he goes to France, he's working in Ariccia. But in the mid-1660s, 1665, the summer of that year, he is called to France. He's summoned by Colbert, who is working on behalf of King Louis XIV. But unfortunately, Bernini's time in France will not be so happy. he was very much in rivalry with the French artists working at the court. His main tasks while he's there are to design an equestrian statue of Bernini that unfortunately was heavily reworked after the artist left France. And he's also charged with creating a series of drawings for the east facade of the Louvre Palace, which is today the very famous museum. And also this bust of the young king, in which again, he displays his tremendous expertise at drilling out the hair of his wig. This is just a remarkable work. Again, the use of the fictive wind blowing the cloak of the young king. Here, he's activated, he's animated and made very dramatic this portrait of one of the most powerful sovereigns in all of Europe at the time. But Bernini does not have a good time here because he comes into conflict with the members of the French court. But I just wanted to show you how Bernini conceived this, just like we saw earlier with the drawing for the apse in Santa Maria in Vialata at the beginning of the presentation. It always began for him with a drawing. In this case, he's trying to work out how this sculptural commission would eventually turn out. Of course, this is how it ended up in reality, and the French sculptor, François Girardon, greatly alters it, particularly because the king was not entirely happy with how Bernini had portrayed him. He wanted it to be different. But nevertheless, the impact that Bernini left on his longest journey outside of Rome, we have to keep in mind Bernini did not really travel very far in his lifetime. He mostly stayed in Italy. Ariccia would be considered one of his departures, and certainly going up to Versailles and Paris was the furthest afield that the artist went. But it's his drawings, it's the prints that are made after his drawings that are so important from this project. And the facade, the east facade of the Louvre was so important because it's in this that Bernini, while at first his first design that you see on the top was impractical because of the flat roof as well as several elements, this curving and undulating facade, as we like to say in architecture, would influence a generation of different architects, including Count Nicodemus Tessin, who was an architect who worked at the royal court in Stockholm, and also many other architects throughout Europe, including those of the Viennese and the German Baroque. It's this kind of very dramatic facade in this drawing that you see here that has a tremendous impact on architecture. It showed the intention of Bernini originally was to conceal the old Louvre Palace, basically by putting this facade onto the old structure. The key elements included the sinuous curves as well as the oval elements that you see here, including the arches, but particularly this bending and curving design, as well as the balustrade. And here is an engraving below that shows also another idea that he had for it. And you can see how some of the engaged columns, as well as the windows for it, ended up in the final east facade project that you see here, although quite altered by the other French architects. So while Bernini didn't have entire success in France, his legacy lived on through the late 17th and well into the 18th century for the designs he provided for the project overall. And with that, I would like to just turn briefly and point out that Bernini is continuing to work just before he goes to France and a little bit afterwards on the redesigning of Ariccia. This included paving new streets, providing designs for the Palazzo Chigi itself, the town being just about 16 kilometers southeast of Rome. And then also this being commissioned by the very important Alexander VII, whom I mentioned before in connection with the Scala Regia. So Bernini is just kind of all over the place in terms of his different commissions that he does. Very important, he also does this important church that we see here that we talked about in Let's Talk Art in the 1660s, and that is made famous by Giovanni Battista Falda's series of prints that are widely distributed throughout Europe. This shows the Corte Square in the Collegiate Church of the Assumption in Ariccia, which combines painting, architecture, and decoration. Alexander VII wasted no time in having Bernini in his workshop create medals that both honored him and also the architectural commissions there, including the sanctuary of Galoro in Ariccia. These medals were struck and meant to be distributed throughout Italy and other parts of Europe as a means of promulgating the patronage of the Pope. Now, something that appeared recently in the news that I wanted to share with you is this really fabulous skull that is in the Dresden State Art Collections, and that was discovered not long ago, actually earlier this year, by a German curator to be by Bernini. And it's the death skull that Alexander VII commissioned from the artist. This is really quite interesting because it's depicted in a portrait by Bernini's pupil named Guido Ubaldo Abatini. And as you can see here, the cardinal, at this time the Pope, has his hand on top of the skull. And here we also have a crucifix and a private altar that he's created for himself. You can see also the star connected to the Chigi coat of arms that Sarah mentioned earlier. This is really very interesting. And at this time, patrons and also artists are very preoccupied with salvation and their life after death. The skull was originally not realized to be by Bernini. Jokingly, one of the curators had said, maybe this thing is by Bernini. And after they looked through a series of archives, both in Dresden and in Italy, Chigi archives specifically, it was determined that this was very likely done by the artist, according to documentary sources. And following Alexander VII's death in 1667, the skull remained in the Chigi family's collection until it was sold in 1728 and purchased along with a trove of other antique sculptures and contemporary artworks by the Elector and King of Saxony and Poland, Augustus the Strong. Thereafter, it was transferred to Dresden. But in the Pope's lifetime, he kept this skull that Bernini created here under his bed, along with a sarcophagus, which may seem very macabre in today's terms, but at the time, this was part of how people conceived of salvation, that you would keep sacred objects or objects that were very perhaps important to you next to you in this particular situation. And here's how it looks, both the portrait when it was displayed along with the skull in Dresden. It's really quite dramatic, the effect that they created here, theatrical lighting, and then directly in back of it, the portrait of the Pope and Bernini's patron. In terms of the continuation of art working together with the inside the context of the church, we see this also taking place in this sanctuary of the Collegiate Church of the Assumption. And here, Bernini collaborated with several of his pupils, including Antonio Raggi and a guy named Guillaume Courtois, whom we mentioned earlier in the Let's Talk Art program. It is, again, an ensemble of architecture, painting, and decoration, all being pulled together under the genius, under the expertise and auspices of Bernini. And I mentioned before Guillaume Courtois. Well, he created a very important work for and in conjunction with Bernini. This is called the Sanguis Christi, and it's on view in the exhibition. And it's a tour de force. It's part of this mystical vision that Bernini developed in his later career, as like his patron, Alexander VII, Bernini became preoccupied with salvation. He was a highly devout Catholic, and this painting was finished by his student, Courtois. And what it does is it shows Bernini's piety for his devotion to the Christian faith. The blood of Christ here spilling below, creating almost a pool or a sea of blood spilling out into the viewer's space as Christ is carried up on high into the heavens on a cross here, crucified. It's really quite a stunning work. And according to sources left behind in the first biography of Bernini by Filippo Baldinucci, it was recounted that Bernini kept this painting with him in his bedroom in his later years, so that he, like the Pope had done here with the skull and also with his large sarcophagus, he could keep it close to him and keep his connection to the Catholic faith and demonstrate his piety as a concern for his well-being in the afterlife. This was also confirmed by the artist's son, Domenico Bernini, in another biography later on, so that he could contemplate according to his son and help ensure that his death would be a good one. This is very much in line with, it epitomizes the elements of the Catholic Counter-Reformation. This became so famous that Bernini actually had artists, other artists help him in his studio to create a series of etchings done after the work that you see here. This is an engraving and an etching. Sorry, the captions got mixed up here. This is the preliminary drawing in which the artist was working out all the details. And this here is a print that's carried out by a French printer on the right-hand side. And this would be able to be easily distributed throughout Europe. So as we come closer, later in Bernini's career, his legacy lives on in many ways, and especially with his pupil, Giovanni Battista Gaoli Baciccia. His very beautiful painting of St. Andrew, shown here on the left, is also in the exhibition, as is this outstanding self-portrait of the artist. Very much self-confident, as one visitor had remarked to me, almost in the manner of Rembrandt in terms of the contrast of the light and the dark. And I found that very interesting because of the contrast between the reds as well as the dark background and the use of the golds here. We have this play of light, the use of chiaroscuro in this self-portrait. He shows himself as totally confident and on the rise. And indeed, Gaoli was. He is commissioned to create this phenomenal painting, which is a visual vision of Christian piety at the time. And specifically, it's connected to the Jesuits. The Triumph of the Name of Jesus and the Fall of the Damned is the official title. It is alternatively called the Adoration of the Sacred Name of Jesus. And basically what it's doing is it's glorifying the Society of the Jesuits, the Society of Jesus. This is their main church called Il Gesù in Rome. And it is Gaoli's very early and quite successful project. If you can try to imagine this, Gaoli only did this when he was in his 20s. It's just amazing. And Bernini actually advised him on how to put together this complex allegory and the entire decorative ensemble. Of course, this was work done by more people than more people than Baciccia. He had to collaborate with stuccoists, interior decorators, gilders, and the architect of the church himself in order to pull this all together. But basically what's happening here is the sacred name of Jesus, which is spelled out in letters here, is ascending into heaven. It's an elaborate apotheosis. And here you have a bunch of figures that are billowing out on these clouds, and they're spilling almost below into the viewer's space. The vices, the demons that are shown here on the lower part of it are cast in shadow, and they are tumbling down into the nave of the church. Here are some details of it, show you how much of an expert Baciccia was in doing this. The light is almost blinding the way that it reaches its pinnacle at the top of the painting. The borders of the picture itself are burst open. The clouds half painted and half sculpted in plaster, spilling out of the picture, the boundaries of the picture itself. And these kinds of paintings were part of pageant plays that were put on during the 17th century in order to emphasize the theatricality of the masses and the drama and climax of church ceremonies, accompanied by low light, lanterns, as well as candles that would have been present in the church. The highest ranks of angels and cherubim surround and adore that holy name of Jesus, trying to involve the viewer, the visitor, into believing the Catholic teachings at the time. A true tour de force of this artist who was only at the time, I think, about 25 or 26 years old, but already destined to do amazing things. It also brings about a sense of surprise and marvel in Baciccia's ingenuity and creativity. This is something that you can see if we start looking at details here. Look at how the figures sort of cower, almost they're afraid, and they're also overpowered by the light of the Society of Jesus. The figures are also very muscular. And in this case, it's interesting to see, I think, that Baciccia is also responding to the drama that we know in Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel frescoes. And he must have known those as well as he was working on this. See, you could see some of the textures and the light, the way that it shines on these demons on the right-hand side of that painting. It's just unbelievable. It epitomizes the grandeur of the Baroque. Other works in the exhibition also include Gaoli's Apotheosis of St. Joseph, which is a study for an unexecuted ceiling, But again, you can see how he's very interested in coloristic effects, in the use of light, and in the dramatic effects and impacts that they can exert on the viewer. We also have in the show an Andrea Pozzo's study for a perspective of an illusionary dome, in which we are meant to believe that space is continued upward in a particular space. So Pozzo, who was an artist who was, for a period of his career, connected to the circle of Bernini, carries on in this tradition. And specifically, Andrea Pozzo was a Jesuit himself. He's a priest, but he's also a painter. And carrying on in the idiom of Bernini, he creates tremendous works like this one, the missionary work of the Jesuits and the Triumph of St. Ignatius. Again, an elaborate illusion meant to make us believe in the teachings of the Jesuits, their global reach, here shown as they reach out to the 4 parts of the world. Their teachings spread throughout the globe. And in this case, what Pozzo does is he amplifies the use of the dramatic fictive architecture called the quadratura in Italian. It pushes up the vault. The vault itself is actually only curved at a modest angle, but we are meant to believe that it continues almost infinitely upwards. So he was a master at this technique. See how the figures look down at us, and they are just tremendous. What a dramatic work. And as I showed you before in that perspectival study, Pozzo created these kinds of domes. In this case, this one is totally fictive. The dome itself is actually quite shallow compared to how it's meant to look as we look up into the lantern. So that's what the Baroque is about. It's very much about the complexity of imagery. It's the layering of it. It's making us believe in illusions and the use of spectacle, both in the actual reality, but also fictively. Now, I'm just going to wrap up with this image here in terms of the global reach of Catholicism at the time with a painting by Jacques Stella, which is quite neat on the left. The Jesuit missionary Roberto Di Nobili in Madras, and it's on view in the exhibition. And I think this is a nice segue because this is the one work in our show, Bernini the Roman Baroque, that explains this global reach of Catholicism at the time. Di Nobili is actually a representative of the Jesuits in India at the time, and he lived in Madras. He learns the local languages in India. He becomes almost in a certain way adopted by the Jesuits, by the Indian people there, including the Brahmins being the members of the highest Hindu caste or level of society. He comes to know their culture and society, and what he does is he advocates for gradual conversion of native peoples through a merging of religious and cultural traditions. But the painting is just so rich in detail. It epitomizes French classicism. See how Di Nobili reaches out in a classical gesture as if he's commanding a crowd. He holds his scriptures. He stands in front of a monument that resembles the Pantheon in Rome. We see here a toppled statue referring to polytheistic religion being triumphed over by Catholicism, and in this case, the representative being Di Nobili. His use of this very precise, exacting classical style is reminiscent of Nicolas Poussin's work. See here his Holy Family from 1649. So Jacques Stella is looking very closely at his close colleague there, Nicolas Poussin. They are almost exact contemporaries of each other. The inscription below spells out the different deeds of this very important Jesuit in the activities of converting Indian peoples from Hinduism and other faiths to Catholicism in the mid-1600s. So I am going to stop there, and I'm going to open it up to questions or comments that you might have. Feel free to, ask anything if there's a particular picture that you wanted to know anything more about. Well, while we're waiting for a moment, one thing that I just wanted to share with you on a personal note is, well, we don't have time to continue. Oh, these are just a couple of other images of Nobili. This is one that was done during the 1650s that shows his likeness, and you can see how it is a very close connection to the painting by Jacques Stella on the right-hand side from the 1640s. Oh, looks like we might have a question there. Okay, the question is, did Bernini sculpt all the while he painted, or was there a certain period in his life when he was more prolific with sculpture versus painting? That's a very good question. You know, in terms of the Bernini's activity as a painter, we basically only have a couple of self-portraits that survive from his lifetime. And so we don't actually have many altarpieces, for example, that survive from his lifetime. His activity is primarily as a sculptor, it's as a designer, it's as an architect. So at least to my knowledge, the paintings that he created can only be more or less firmly attributed to those specific self-portraits. However, as you saw earlier with the Sanguis Christi painting, that one, the preparatory drawing, he actually would have instructed his student there, Guillaume Courtois, in, I'll go back to it, he would have given him instructions perhaps on how to do the overall design. Take you back there. So Bernini knows how to conceive a overall composition. Here, in this case, it is done in pen, brush, and brown ink over black chalk. So he conceives it. And I think what he was doing was, rather than actually painting the works himself, he would hand off this initial concept to somebody like Guillaume Courtois. Now, it's entirely possible there may have been altarpieces executed by Bernini. If I had to take a guess, he would have done those probably a little bit earlier in his life, but there is some evidence to suggest that even into the 1660s and early 70s, he may have had a hand in something. So I hope that helps to clarify that a bit more. I'm happy to take any other questions or comments. Very good. The question is, did the dome pictured earlier really exist? Well, the one that's in the exhibition, according to the scholarship, it actually was more a concept that Pozzo was developing. This one here. This painting was more him working out the dome itself. There are other sketches that can be directly linked with the one that you see here in Sant'Ignazio Church in Rome, this one. But the one that we have in the exhibition is not tied to, or has not yet been discovered that it went with a particular project. So I hope that helps out a little bit. Oftentimes artists would do a series of these oil sketches. They would present them to their patrons, and then the patrons would get to decide, oh, okay, I like that. No, I don't like it so much. I'd like you to change it a little bit. And just very briefly, that's what happened with a couple of other works that we have in the show, particularly the Giuseppe Passeri, that's the glory of the Patrizzi house. This is intended to glorify the patron here, Costanzo Patrizzi, who built himself and renovated this Palazzo Patrizzi, which is outside of Rome. In, I believe it is, let me just check here. The Castello, in Castel Giuliano is the name of the town. But essentially, this kind of a sketch, which glorifies the patron, would have been presented to by Passeri to Patrizzi, like Pozzo would have done with the dome sketch. The same thing goes for this really neat one, which is the latest work in the exhibition, The Glory of the Borghese House, 1767, which glorifies the Borghese family. And you can see here, again, it's in one of these complex allegories, a crown crowning the coat of arms. Here's the finished painting. So it's really neat to be able to put these side by side and see how the artist adapts the composition from the model to the finished product itself. And I'd just like to close by saying that this exhibition, particularly the sketches, is, in addition to the other works, is something that I really have a passion for. My book, Exuberant Apotheoses, Italian Frescoes in the Holy Roman Empire, is about how these paintings, these elaborate ceiling paintings, sort of exploded in the German states, so north of the Alps, in Ludwigsburg Palace, and very famously the Würzburg residence with Giovanni Battista Tiepolo and artists like Carlo Carlone. So I encourage you to check out at least a preview of my book. It's in Google Books. So it's so wonderful to have these paintings at the Washington County Museum of Fine Arts at this time, to see them in person and to learn about their stories. So are there any other questions or comments that I can take? Okay, we've got a comment here. Yes, that's very interesting. We have a participant who said that in reference to the Pullenburg, which was the scene of the ruins, where we had the gentleman who's peeing on the monument, that yes, it's both humorous, but also a commentary on art is long, but life is short. And what was done on earth can be base, but some of our creations endure and raise us up. That's very telling. Thank you for making that contribution, that comment. It certainly is. Leaves the viewer with a way to sort of contemplate this. Very interesting scene, combining both the antique and the everyday or the mundane. So, thank you for that. If there aren't any more comments, I will just say to everybody, thank you so much for joining us tonight. This has been wonderful to be able to share my insights about the Bernini and the Roman Baroque exhibition, and more broadly about Bernini and artists in his circle. So thank you so much for coming on, and I hope to see you again soon. In fact, it will be next week with Sarah and our colleagues, but that time talking about Joshua Johnson and the genealogy of some of his sitters in the portraits. So thanks so much. And I hope you have a very nice night.